Joining me is American musician, singer, and songwriter who was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997 as a member of Buffalo Springfield and inducted into the Colorado Music Hall of Fame in 2015 as a member of POCO. Not to mention, he recently released a country music album called In the Country. On behalf of myself and Brandeis University, Richie Furay, thank you for taking the time to speak on the show.
Hey, William, thank you for having me, man. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Growing up in Ohio, how did your childhood experiences and your interactions with music come to later shape your musical career?
You know, it was mainly, I think, through my dad, and he loved listening to the radio. He couldn't play a thing, but he listened to the radio and brought music into the house. And there's where I think I just picked it up. And from there, I mean, because there was no really other attachment. I talked to some of my friends, or, you know, if I've gone in conversation with some of my friends over the years, you know, they have somebody that was musical, played in a band, did not in a band, but, you know, yes, but there was no one else in my family, you know, that was really musical, and it was just something that was inherent in me, I guess.
Can you share with our listeners then how Buffalo Springfield came to be?
Well, I met Stephen Stills back in New York. We were in a folk group together. It was a one of those New Christy Minstrels serendipity singer groups. For those of you who might know that, there was a group of 9 people. And when that group broke up, Stephen went off to California. And I went to work up in Connecticut in East Hartford and Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. And when a friend of mine brought an album up to me, and he said, "You got to hear this album." He lived across the street from me in New York, and he said, "You got to hear this album." And it was the Byrds' first record. Graham Parsons is the one that brought it up to me. And I said, "Boy, I got to get a hold of Stephen and find out what he's doing." And when I called him, he said, "Hey, man, come on out to California. All I need is another singer. We got a band together, and we'll go to town." And, you know, so I took care of all my business and got out to California, and Stephen and I were the band. There was no other band. So that was kind of a freaky thing, man. Like, oh boy, what have I done now? You know, but that's where it all started, with the two of us sitting in a little apartment in Los Angeles on Fountain Boulevard, learning all the songs that Stephen had written for the first album that actually ended up to be the first album Buffalo Springfield recorded. And then you know, we ran into Neil and Bruce on Sunset Boulevard. There's a famous story that Neil had come to California looking for Stephen, and he'd been out there for a month. This was well before, you know, cell phones and computers and all that stuff. Couldn't find him, and he and Bruce were on their way to the 405 to go to San Francisco. They had enough of it, you know, and there we were, as fate would have it, man. We just kind of connected. So that was the beginning of the Springfield.
And when you're talking about how it came to be, were there particular influences or other artists or bands that I guess Buffalo Springfield was trying to mimic or copy, or was it more so that we're going to try and create our own style here?
You know, there was no mimicking. Now, it's one thing that I think is really pretty unique for every band or anything that I've ever done. I was never asked, or we were never asked, consequently, "Hey, could you sound like this group, or would you, you know, mimic this group, or do whatever?" We came out of folk music. If you look at the back of the second Buffalo Springfield record called Buffalo Springfield Again, you can see all the list of influences and people that, you know, we were influenced by. But as far as, you know, trying to copy somebody, no, we had our own, you know, Neil brought, and I brought, you know, our own unique, you know, experiences into the band, and that's what formed Buffalo Springfield.
Do you have a favorite song in particular?
A favorite song of what?
Of Buffalo Springfield in general, overall.
Oh,
one that
golly,
has great
you know,
memories, or
well,
one that
yeah.
was just great time.
I guess, you know, one of my favorite songs would have to have been "Go and Say Goodbye," because I've recorded that record 3 times myself, not only on Buffalo Springfield, but on projects that I've done in the past, and still play it a lot in concerts when I go out. So it's got to be one of my favorite songs.
A different song that I want to touch on is obviously the Buffalo, their hit, For What It's Worth. And irrespective of the era or music genre, songs always intersect with emotion and current events. Can you share how that song was created and the emotions that band members were feeling then?
Well, it was created by Stephen. Stephen actually, people have a misinterpretation of the song as well. They think it's, you know, written as a protest song for the Vietnam War or something. Had nothing at all to do with that. there was a conflict that was going on between the police and young folks in Los Angeles at the time, that meant in a little club called Pandora's Box, which was at the intersection of Sunset Boulevard, Crescent Heights, and Laurel Canyon and Boulevard. And that's where they were meeting, and the police, thought that it was a hazard to traffic or just the congestion at the time, and so they were shutting down that club. And Stephen happened to observe what was going on, and it's all written there in the song. Hey, there's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear, but there's a man with a gun over there, and so that's what it was all about. Interestingly enough, that title, For What It's Worth, is not in the song. And I'll give you a little backstory on that. The first Buffalo Springfield record was not really having the success that Atlantic Records had hoped for. And the president had come out to California to hear some songs, maybe for a second album. And after Neil played some songs, and I actually played some songs that got on the second album, and Stephen played some songs, and we're packing up our guitars, and Stephen abruptly stopped. I have another one, For What It's Worth. And that was the song, and Ahmet said, that's a hit, man. We got to record that now. And so they brought back the album, took one of the songs off called You Baby Don't Scold Me, and put that album on and then re-released it again.
Staying on the theme of Atlantic Records, in May of 1966, Buffalo Springfield signed with Atlantic Records. Can you provide insight into how relations both develop and crumble between artists and record labels in the music industry overall, irrespective of the genre or how big the band or single artist is?
Yeah, well, I know Ahmet was, there's documents it's documented on various YouTube presentations that Ahmet was heartbroken is the only word that I can use when he heard Buffalo Springfield was breaking up. We had I can only speak, from the relationship that we had with him as the president of Atlantic. And of course, we were on ATCO, subsidiary of Atlantic. And he really loved the band. He loved us as people, Stephen and Neil had probably more of a personal relationship with Ahmet than I did, but I also had really good memories of him. So, we had good interaction with him, and I can only speak, from our experience with him, that it was a great time, and he showed it by just his emotions when he spoke about the band being broken up, especially I think when we were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in '97. You could just sense there was a heartfelt message that he gave during that time too.
Through different record labels, different genres, working now as a solo artist, but in the past with bands, do you find the music business has changed in the last 50 years?
Yeah.
And how
tremendously.
So? And how so?
Well,
particularly, I'm talking about with finances and business side of it.
Yeah, and it has. When digital started to come into play, it really changed the whole landscape of artists and how they got paid and how they made their money. It used to be that we would make a record, and if the record was made in such a way that it was that it sold well, then you would recoup the money from what it cost the record company to put it out, and then the artist would then begin to get the artist royalties from that project. With digital, it just really changed, and there's a company called Sound Exchange now that really is the one that overlooks a lot of the digital stuff that's out there, but it changed dramatically. Now, for a group, many groups to go out, that's the only way they can make money is if they tour. Unless you're a big artist, otherwise, it's pretty small potatoes out there.
As I highlight your success with Buffalo Springfield, including working with Stephen Stills and Neil Young, how do you think your time with the band helped shape your success as an independent country music artist?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a country music artist. I would say I started a genre of music in Los Angeles, which was just acknowledged in Nashville as they did a display called Western Edge. and it's in the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. There's a big display out there now. But I would never really consider myself to have been a country artist. I was pretty much, come from the rock and roll side. That was what polka was about, trying to cross the two genres. So we did start, that genre of music that the Eagles, they basically became the focus of that whole genre of music that we started. Other than that, I'm not sure. It was just music that was really in my heart. When Jimmy Messina and I, talked about putting a band together, he was the last bass player in Buffalo Springfield. We talked about, hey, let's put some music together that is a crossover for country and rock. We weren't really doing anything that was that new. I mean, there were those involved years and years ago, Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent, Carl Perkins, Eddie Cochran, that were more or less country artists. I would say that they were my influences. And so what we were doing was just really bringing it, back up to the forefront.
Do you consider then your newest album, the In the Country album, to be country music?
Well, definitely the focus on that was country music, because the songs that we picked, that Val Gray, the producer, and I picked, came from country music. So yes, in that regard, that record certainly was focused more towards a country music audience, although it would also include my audience, but it's called In the Country. And so the fact that, all of the songs that we picked were songs that were, written by or recorded by country artists, it would be a country album.
And what were the influences and motives for releasing this newest album?
Well, it was Val Gray came to me. Val, who is a very successful producer on the rock and roll side. He was, first of all, an engineer with Peter Asher, working with James Taylor and Linda Ronstadt. And so he had a big influence, but he also recorded my 1979 record called I Still Have Dreams. Val and I were friends way back to Buffalo Springfield days. And he came to me back in 2018 and just said, hey, do you want to make another record with me? And I asked him, what ideas he had. And he said, well, why don't we do this record where we do covers of country hits? So he was kind of like the one that was instrumental in putting, in at least generating the thought behind the album.
When most think of country music today, they think of Taylor Swift or Luke Bryan, Dierks Bentley, etc. What are the similarities and differences between your style of music and theirs, would you say? And specifically highlighting, again, your newest album?
Well, I think, it was the influence. I think country music today actually picked up on what we were trying to do in 1969. I think those were the influences that I really saw, where country music started to get more of a sound rather than it was more rock, should I say? Even with your Keith Urbans and Tim McGraw's and those type of people, Kenny Chesney. Yes, it was country, but I think they also picked up on what we were doing, and so there was a blend. From those people and the ones that you mentioned as well. I think how it all turned out, was just that we had this idea over here on one side, and they had the idea, and it just kind of blended. And I think what they are doing today, has a lot of influence on what we did, or we're starting back in 1969.
Would you say that you're more of a fan today of using, when you're producing music, of using traditional instruments, drums, guitars, such, or do you appreciate the use of techno and adding creative software and such to making your music? Or again, do you just prefer simple instruments?
I'm just basic simple,
Okay.
That's why I also like to record in the studio with live musicians. I want to have a drummer out there. I don't want a click track, I want a live musician. And that was one thing about In the Country. We had all the musicians gathered together in the studio, and then I'm in a vocal booth, and 90% of that record I sang live. that the tracks that you hear now, they're tweaked. I mean, I didn't sing perfectly live, so we had to tweak them a little bit, but the emotions are so more important than when you're overdubbing to a track. We're all feeling this at one time, and that's what's really special about. That's one of the things that I think is very special about the album too.
There's currently a documentary being produced titled Through It All: The Life and Influence of Richie Furay. When will that be available for our listeners to watch, and what can they expect?
Well, my manager, David Stone, and his partner, Denny Klein, decided several years ago, that, hey, we need to document your life. It's different. I mean, I took time off at one point in time, pastored a church for 35 years, and then started to play again. And, had a marriage that was about to dissolve, but it got healed. And I've been married for 55 years now to the same woman that I met at the Whiskey A Go-Go back in 1965, So, I mean, it's a unique story. They thought it was worth putting together. And so it's going to be completed. We have one more interview that we're getting ready to do in about a month out in California, getting together with Stephen and Neil, and we're going to all sit down, and Stephen and I have already done an interview, but we're getting Neil involved. So all three of us will be sitting in the same room, and Cameron Crowe's going to do he'll do the interview. And so it's going to come out next year.
And talking about California, you were on the East Coast this week performing in New York City. Later on, towards the end of the calendar year, you're out in California, and also starting at the beginning of 2023. For any listeners who are out in California then and who are interested in seeing you, what information can you provide, and what can they expect from these concerts?
Well, the concerts, particularly that I'm going to be doing in California in February, I think I have one scheduled right now in Poway, and I will have a full band. Sometimes I go out with just my daughter Jessie Lynch and my friend Dan Scarta, and we just do a little folk. It's not a folk trio, but it's more of a living room presentation. These are how the songs were kind of generated with just our harmonies and all. So I'll be out there with the band. When I was back east, I just had my daughter and Dan, and I had my friend Jack Check play with me. But in California, it'll be a full-time band. We'll be playing in Poway, I think it is. Yeah. When I go out here in California in December, it's a different event that I will actually have that same band playing with me. I got a great bunch of guys from San Diego that I play with now, which it's just a lot of fun for an old guy, man. I mean, I can do so many different ways now. It's really exciting. I love it,
Fantastic. Richie Furay, you sound well and you look well. Thank you again for joining the program and providing great perspectives.
Hey, William, thank you so much for having me, man. Appreciate it. If people can go and interact with me at richiefuray.com too.
Awesome.